The armored dinosaurs are some of the most interesting. Whatever you think about the badassery of the predatory dinosaurs, the vast array of crests of the hadrosaurs, the bizarre guts, chests, necks, and tails of the sauropods, or the copy my homework but don't forget to change it a little ceratopsians, the armored dinosaurs adapted to their armored lifestyle in a way that places them far outside the realm of what we might consider normal for dinosaurs. Despite how much is known about the biggest and most advanced of the armored dinosaurs, like namesake stegosaurus and ankylosaurus, virtually nothing is known of their ancestors and cousins. A slew of new fossil finds from the global south are blowing open a lost world of armored dinosaur diversity literally no one could have suspected. And a brand new alien puzzle piece was just described that proves there is a lot more than meets the eye when it comes to armored dinosaurs. Meet Jakapil. The armored dinosaurs come in two major flavors: walking tank and walking billboard. The ankylosaurs and the stegosaurs. This was the case since the first one was named Hylaeosaurus in the early 1800s, and since the first ones were recognized in the later 1800s, Stegosaurus and Scelidosaurus. Since the first dozen or so were found, some refinement has been made of the groups. The ankylosaurs are now known to come in three flavors: big rounded bruisers with hammer tails, flattened spiny brawlers with hacksaw tails, and adorable dog-sized lumpy ankle breakers with battle axe tails. The stegosaurs, the walking billboards, haven't seen as much diversification in groupings. They can loosely be separated into the ones more like Stegosaurus with the usual spiked thagomizer tail and flatter, showier bony plates along the back, and the ones less like Stegosaurus with spikes all over their bodies rather than flat, showy plates. Though there has technically been a transitional form between the stegosaurs and ankylosaurs known for over a century, Scelidosaurus, rather few dots have been connected between it and the later stegosaurs and ankylosaurs. All of these armored dinosaurs were semi-confidently ascribed to the huge bin known as Thyreophora, the shield bearers. They are part of the ornithischian, or bird-hipped dinosaurs, along with the ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, the ornithopods, the crested horse lizards, and the many weird bipedal porcupine wolverine lizards that bobbled about like schizophrenic skeksis. The earliest known thyreophorans are all mostly fragmentary patchwork beasts that represent the first major radiation of the group before they diverged into the ankylosaurs and stegosaurs. Only a few preserved good enough specimens to provide some meaningful evolutionary data: Scelidosaurus, Scutellosaurus, and Emosaurus. All of these guys are from the global north. Scelidosaurus from England, Emosaurus from Germany, and Scutellosaurus from the southwestern US. Scutellosaurus was a small little lad that ran around on its back legs like a small ornithopod. Scelidosaurus was a big chunk that walked on all fours, with the possibility of walking on its hind legs, and looked more like a spiky armored stegosaur. These forms represented the early evolution of locomotion for the whole Thyreophoran group, as they eventually all dropped down to all fours as they got too damn fat to waddle atop two legs. They were not rocking thigh highs. Stegosaurs and ankylosaurs are extremely common in the northern continents, but unicorns in the south. They are extremely rare in the Gondwanan continents. You know, your South Americas, your Antarcticas, your Africas, Madagascar, India, Australia, its accompanying islands. With that said, new, bizarre, and horribly fragmentary early members of the Thyreophora have been increasingly discovered over the last few years. Antarctopelta comes from the South Pole and was a weirdo. Australia has a few weird blunt-nosed ankylosaurs. The Moroccan Spicomelus is probably the weirdest single dino rib ever found. Stegosaurus was a South American relative to the Australian and Antarctic ancient ankylosaurs and carried a battle axe on its tail. And finally, a brand new weirdo has been added to this list from the rocks of Argentina. All the way back in 2012, a team of paleontologists from a few different institutions found the scattered, tattered, fragmentary, but pretty much completely 3D remains of a small little dinosaur on a plot of land owned by the Mariluan family not too far away from the local E. Ramos Mejia Dam in the vicinity of Cerro Policia within the La Buituera Paleontological Area, or simply LBPA, all of which is in North Patagonia, Rio Negro Province, Argentina. The find finally got some work on it between the field seasons of 2014 and 2019/2020, after which it was brought back to the Paleovertebrate collection at the Museo Provincial Carlos Ameghino in Cipolite, Argentina. The remains of this little dinosaur were isolated and laid out in a disarticulated mess in which you couldn't really tell which end was which, and lodged in the lower part of a 10-meter bed composed of gray to yellowish, well-assorted sandstone, interpreted as migrating dune deposits, all of which might explain a little bit as to why the skeleton was so torn apart. That skeleton consists of most of the absolutely massive lower jaw, some chunks of the skull, bits of the neck, torso, pelvic, and tail vertebrae, a couple chunks of the pelvis, chunks of the thigh, lower leg and toes, and some ribs, the shoulder blade, a slice of the chest, a bit of the humerus, lower arm, and hand, and a small assortment of bony armor, providing a sample from all over the body, head to toe. All in all, it was missing quite a lot, and quite a lot of the parts that would give you a good filled-out image of what the animal looked like. That being said, enough is in this skeleton to approximate the missing pieces to a greater or lesser degree. The team describing these fossils, Facundo J. Righetti, Sebastian Apestegia, and Javier Pereira Suberbiola, have given the skeleton the name Jakapil Caniucura. Jakapil, or Jakapil, comes from the Ganana Iahish Welchian, or Northern Tehuelchian language, which means shield bearer. The species name, Caniucura, comes from the Mapudungun language. It is composed of Caniu for crest and Cura for stone, and refers to the crest on the lower jaw of the animal. This is the animal ever. It seems that every single small armored dinosaur being discovered in the global south is just an absolutely adorable little pig-turtle chonker. Each one is weird. Each one belongs to its own ghost lineage with vague connections to already known dinosaur groups. And each one would have made a perfect pet based on size and cuteness only. So with all that aside, what the hell are we looking at here? To be perfectly honest, though the descriptors gave some good reasoning for their conclusion, a perfect conclusion on what the hell this thing is cannot be confidently reached. So, what we got here is a small animal. The critter reached about 1.5 meters, 4.9 feet in length, and weighed in at a paltry 4.5 to 7 kilograms, 9.9 to 15.4 pounds. Pfft, that's just a warm-up set at the gym, baby weight. A lot of holes had to be filled in for Jakapil to get this skeletal diagram. It's probably not horribly off if the animal is what the descriptors concluded it as, which I'll get into here pretty quick. Jakapil had an absolutely enormous lower jaw. The back pieces, the syrangular and angular bones, are enormously inflated compared to the relatively slender pointy dentary, the front part of the jaw here. Critters that have beaks at the tips of their lower jaws get a special term for that beak tip, since it's made of bone and sort of separate from the dentary bone of the jaw proper. That tip is called the predentary. Based on the lower jaw and the handful of mini chunks of the skull that were found, the team hypothesized that it would have had a short skull. They hypothesized this also due to the number of tooth holes in the lower jaw. There are less of them than what you would find in an animal with a proportionally longer skull. The teeth were leaf-shaped and placed atop long tubular roots. This, combined with its beak, suggests it is an herbivore. It seems to have had a relatively short neck with a proportionately large head. That neck was probably connected to a barrel-shaped torso that was unusually carried atop a pair of slender but well-built hind legs. An unusual thing about the proportions of Jakapil is that it had absolutely tiny little mitten hands. The short skull with big beak, long hind limbs, and tiny forelimbs makes it relatively similar in appearance to the bizarre Noasaurid theropod from Brazil described last year as Berthosaura. Check out my video on that cursed beast to learn more. There ain't much more to this animal's endoskeleton that I can describe without painstakingly going through each of the bones as the paper already has. I mean, Jakapil has been speculatively reconstructed with a long tail, I guess. There are only 2 bones from the tail known, so there isn't much to know about there. Considering the possible identity of Jakapil, there may have been some cool bony decorations on the tail though. The next part of this beast's biology is its exoskeleton. Yes, that's right, technically vertebrate animals have an endoskeleton, bones on the inside. However, the vertebrates that carry keratin-sheathed bone armor, osteoderms, have an exoskeleton as well, since it sits on the outside of the inside bones and doesn't have any muscle attachments on the top. Jakapil had a set of osteoderms along the side of the neck that were large and diamond-shaped. An arrow-shaped set of osteoderms then bent out and down from the side armor. This obnoxious set of neck armor probably stopped most predators from straight up decapitating the poor little beast. To take this a step further, Jakapil also had a paired set of spiny armor starting directly behind the skull that continued down the back of the neck, transitioning into flatter osteoderms along the midline of the back. It seems to have also had at least 1 row of ovular osteoderms along the lower part of the torso and 1 up near the pelvis. The rest that you see in this skeletal diagram and in many of the other reconstructions of the animal are speculative and inferred from its closest relatives as found by the team that described Jakapil. What is unusual here is that most early Thyreophorans had tall spiny armor. Scelidosaurus and Scutellosaurus look like angry pineapples with backward-pointing bladed osteoderms. Jakapil here has low, ovular armor, similar to what is seen in the more advanced ankylosaurs. What is it though? Now we come to what the hell this thing is. I hinted at it with how I started this video. To get straight to the point, because boy do we have some places yet to go, the team found that Jakapil was a Thyreophoran, a floating sister taxon to the entire Ankylosauria clade. That means it was not an Ankylosaurian, but was outside of that group. They found that Jakapil was most closely related to the European Scelidosaurus, which is what they filled in the missing spaces with. Though this does fit with what is known about these early armored dinosaurs, it is rather weird. Thyreophorans are incredibly rare in the southern continents. The advanced forms of stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, and nodosaurs are entirely absent except for in Australia. Stegosaurus, for example, has been found to belong to its own unique offshoot group, along with Antarctopelta and Conbarosaurus, called the Parankylosauria. This is now considered a sister group of ankylosaurs to the group that contains all the other ankylosaurs, now named the Euankylosauria. Jakapil comes from the late Cretaceous of Argentina, making it a completely new Thyreophoran lineage for the southern hemisphere. It has many similarities to early Ornithischians and Thyreophorans, but it also has several completely new and unique features. Jakapil's heavily decorated cerangular bone, jaw with a prominent adductor fossa, and well-developed coronoid look similar to those of the heterodontosaurids and primitive ceratopsians, implying a powerful bite for a Thyreophoran. Due to how fragmentary this animal is, and considering some parts of its bones share similarities to the bones of other groups, perhaps it is not a Thyreophoran. Dr. Susie Maidment, a dinosaur researcher and curator of fossil archosaurs at the Natural History Museum of London with a special interest in Ornithischian dinosaurs, was a reviewer on the paper that described the remains of Jakapil. Dr. Maidment doesn't think little Jakapil here really is an early Thyreophora. Instead, she favors a wholly novel, armored lineage of South American ceratopsians. She explained her reasoning as the following. 1. The premaxilla bone. This guy at the front of the face lacks teeth, according to the supplementary data of the paper. This is unusual because all known early Thyreophorans and even early stegosaurs with the potential to include early ankylosaurs had teeth in this predatory bone. The ankylosaurs and stegosaurs eventually lose these teeth convergently over time. 2. Based on Dr. Maidment's observations of early Thyreophorans, she remains unconvinced that these weird dinosaurs had a predatory element, that little beak tip of the lower jaw. Even if these guys did have a predatory bone, they would have been relatively small rod-like bones that lacked a ventral prong. This is not seen in Jakapil. On the contrary, the little critter had a huge predatory bone that has a robust ventral strut. In fact, the way the predatory curves is quite a bit more like the predatory of early ceratopsians upon first glance. 3. What Dr. Maidment says is a lack of dental tooth row sinuosity. The Thyreophorans are known for having a tooth row that is sinuous in lateral view. Instead, Jakapil has a tooth row that is what Dr. Maidment calls deeply inset with quite a prominent ridge that delimits the emargination. We don't absolutely need to know what that means right now. It does, however, make the tooth row a hell of a lot more similar in shape to that of early ceratopsians like Protoceratops and Bagaceratops. 4. The jaw's thickness. No known early Thyreophora has a jaw this thick. On the contrary, early ceratopsians all have quite thick lower jaws, similar to Jakapil here. 5. The cerangular bone. This part of the lower jaw is not like what is seen in early Thyreophorans. The early Thyreophorans have a strong ridge on the cerangular bone, but that is missing in Jakapil. Apparently, the paper authors write that Jakapil has a bit of swelling in the cerangular, but even this does not look like what is seen in other early Thyreophorans. In contrast, the cerangular bone of Jakapil is ornamented as in early ceratopsians. 6. Teeth. Unfortunately, the teeth of Jakapil don't look like early Thyreophoran teeth and actually look more like those in the skulls of pachycephalosaurs. In fact, the teeth in the lower jaw of Jakapil have asymmetrical crowns. This is a condition not really seen in any Thyreophoran. 7. The shoulder blades are fishy. Dr. Maidment says Jakapil's shoulder blades are parallel bladed. We don't need to know what that means except that a parallel bladed shoulder blade is not seen in other early Thyreophorans. Instead, the blades of early Thyreophorans are flayed distally. 8. The neck vertebrae are unlike those of early Thyreophorans. These are all great points. Dr. Thomas Holtz chimed in, agreeing with the statements. Does this mean the authors are wrong and that Jakapil was an early ceratopsian? No, not really. It just shows that Jakapil is too primitive and too fragmentary to get a confident judge of precisely what dinosaur it was. At the very least, it can be confidently placed within the Ornithischian clade. Vertebrate paleontologist and curator of the North Dakota State Fossil Collection, Clint Boyd, was also asked to be a reviewer to the Jakapil paper but couldn't be due to timing and other stuff, but seems to agree with Dr. Maidment about Jakapil's odd identity. A commenter brought up the newly described early ankylosaur stegosaurus as a possible relative, as it is missing teeth in the premaxilla bones too, just like in Jakapil, and has what is called a strong ventral predatory process, which is also seen in Jakapil. On top of that, stegosaurus is also South American and from the late Cretaceous. Perhaps the lack of common early Thyreophoran traits in the fragmentary remains of Jakapil is due to its evolutionary isolation in South America. An associate with the Natural History Museum of London's Dino Lab chimed in with, "Is it definitely a single individual? Could it be a chimera? Given the age, could the armor be from a titanosaur mixed with other things? Dinosaurus was originally thought to be an armored theropod for similar reasons." Dr. Maidment responded with, Possibly, this is what they say about that. The new specimen was found as a close association of elements in a small area, 1.5 meters by 1 meter, isolated from any other individual, as generally occurs in the Candelaros Formation in the LBPA. That means that it is more likely that the remains do, in fact, belong to a single individual animal, as posited by the paper, than for it to be a chimera, being a jumbled mess of a couple different animals. The lab guy responded with, "Interesting, I agree there's nothing other than the armor that shouts Thyreophora to me, much more ceratopsian-like in many respects. Ironically, it used to be thought that some ceratopsians were armored, hence Nopska originally including them in Thyreophora. Indeed, the horned dinosaurs were included in the armored dinosaur group, partially due to their horns and shields, but also because the first ceratopsian, Agathaumas, was thought to have had armor on its body. These bits of bone armor turned out to belong to an ankylosaur, probably Denversaurus. Learn more about the story of Agathaumas in my video on the beast. Average Toarkian fan provided a very interesting detail I and many others overlooked. Jakapil's ribs are T-shaped in cross-section. Not only is this a characteristic of Thyreophoran ribs to help provide strength and support for the wide hips and armor, but it is also a characteristic of the unusual spiny rib of Spicomelus, which was also recently described. Spicomelus is known from a single rib with some fused spiny armor. It was considered an early Thyreophoran, like Jakapil, but almost nothing can be said about it other than it was weird. Perhaps there is a connection here too. Brian Ang, ever the one to jump on reconstructing funny little guys, fancy speculative structures and alternate takes, created an illustration of what a Jakapil that was more of an early ceratopsian might look like. It seems unusual to any of us that are familiar with these little eagle-faced animals, as they are all armorless. But according to Dr. Holtz, Jakapil is separated from the rest of the Thyreophoran tree by 60 million years, which is about the same amount of time for the entire Cenozoic era. I think that is more than enough time for a separate lineage of South American mini bipedal horned dinosaurs to evolve their own bony armor. Dr. Andrea Cao did his own analysis of the bones to see if his phylogenetic models would come up with the same answer as the authors. Dr. Cao kept finding the animal to be a Thyreophoran. He states that it is not less weird for the animal to be an armored ceratopsian than for it to be a late surviving non-stego Anky-Thyreophoran. James McPhee brought up yet another interesting point about this case. There is a Thyreophoran tooth known from the Kemkem group, the late Cretaceous sandwich of sediment from North Africa that gave us Spinosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, and more. This tooth is similarly asymmetrical to Jakapil. He posits that we may be looking at the tip of an iceberg, a ghost lineage of dinosaurs that was present throughout Cretaceous Gondwana, that just so happened to escape the fossil record, at least for now. Therefore, not much can be said about the animal itself. So, what can be said about its world and the animals it may have interacted with? The holotype and referred materials of Jakapil were found in the upper beds of the Candelaros Formation, a layer of rock that dates to the Cenomanian stage of the late Cretaceous, about 97 to 94 million years ago. The remains were found in deposits that have been interpreted as migrating dune deposits, meaning where it died and/or where it was buried was arid and deserty. The different levels of the Candelaros Formation found in the area of Jakapil have also been interpreted to represent a relationship between drier desert biomes and fluvial or river biomes. The presence of Jakapil near the margins of the desert and its absence at the center are assumed to be due to the higher availability of food sources. So, deserts, rivers, and some forested areas. What else was around? The Candelaros was home to many dinosaurs. Theropods included the tremendously large Giganotosaurus and Echrizanatosaurus. Buitroraptor, a small thin-snouted dromaeosaur, fished for sharks and lungfish by the river's edge, while frogs hopped and the primitive snake Najash snooped around for baby dinosaurs. The huge Ankylosaurus shook the ground beneath its feet, while the bizarre Rabachisaurids, Limesaurus, Nopcospondylus, and Reconstructing mowed down ferns and conifer needles like Dyson vacuums. Small lizard-like rhynchocephalians like Priosphenodon and Tika scampered through the underbrush, staying out of the way of small predators like Bicentenaria or Alnachetri. Iguanodonts stomped around looking mean, while small mammals stayed out of their way, like the saber-toothed squirrel Chronopio. It was a very happening place with the potential to be even more happening. Only more research, fossil hunting trips, and digs will provide us with the data we need to make better conclusions on these wonderful creatures. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, hit the bell icon for updates, like this video, and drop a comment in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my elephant tier patrons: Arda Bayer, Biotiverse, Christoph Hubinger, Dinosaur, Isaiah Garza, P.A. Brew News, Ray, Rudy Redgrave, Smiling Walrus. And another thanks to my Tyrannosaurus tier patrons: Iberospinus, Iron Bladesman, Swaffles is Weird, Teeny Dragator, The Dogman,